Hello, welcome to InSight. I'm Wendy Brokaw. If you felt sure someone you know is suicidal or sounds as if they are, would you know what to do or say? What if that person is a child? Do not be surprised if it is. According to Salem-Keizer Public School District, suicide is the second leading cause of death in America among young people aged 10 to 24. 1 out of 6 students seriously considered suicide in the last year. That is why the district is partnering with Salem Health in a series of free suicide prevention training for our community so they may learn QTR, question, persuade, and refer. Would you please welcome with us in studio today Kelly Ward. She is a counselor at Walker Middle School here in Salem. Kelly, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Wendy.
I'm thinking of the title of this training, QPR. That sounds an awful lot like CPR, you know, the kind of training that you would never want to use, but you're awfully glad you took it, and if there was a need, it could save a life.
Absolutely, and it's very similar to that. You know, when our people are in crisis, we want to reach out and help them. So QPR is question, persuade, refer.
How would that work, for example? Why did they choose that? Question, for example.
Well, I think just being able to know what questions to ask, or being able to listen for some of those symptoms or signals that students are sharing with us, or anybody sharing with us for that matter. And then persuading them to know that they're not alone, that we're there to care, that we're hearing them, we're listening, and that we want them to be safe, and so to be able to hand them off warmly, get them the referrals that they need, whether that be in a school setting, the school counselor, and sometimes reaching out to community resources to get them the assistance that they require.
Can you give us any insight? What's going on with 10 to 14-year-olds so that they would even think of taking their lives?
Yeah, I think there's a lot wrapped up in that, right? So it's kind of unpeeling an onion, or as I refer to it as my students, that everyone comes with an invisible backpack. And so inside of that invisible backpack is their life story. And so with that life story, that sometimes they get stuck in a moment where they just don't know what to do. And so especially with the ages of 10 to 14, you know, their beautiful brains are not yet fully developed, and they don't have all those skills and strategies in place to get through that moment. And so that's where the QPR comes into place, that there are adults and even other peers that are able to kind of get them through that moment.
What's your experience with the area of cyberbullying, for example? A lot of kids went to school before that obviously didn't have cell phones, didn't have social media. Is that a huge factor in the lives of kids today?
It definitely plays a factor. You know, a lot of our kids have access to technology, and there's endless amounts of things that they have access to anymore. Cyberbullying is an issue, but it's not the only issue. It's just one of the contributing factors.
How are you encouraging parents to get involved with helping, or even seeing the signs in kids that they're even thinking in this awful and permanent direction of suicide? How are you helping them?
Well, a lot of times when it comes out of our offices, we're making direct contact with parents when we are concerned for our students. And I think this invitation to now moving beyond staff for Salem-Keizer and just opening it up to the community and recognizing that we have a need. And the more that we talk about it and we destigmatize the whole idea around suicide, around mental health, that we're going to be benefiting more people.
Why are you concentrating on the idea of destigmatizing? Is that a big factor in why they don't seek help?
I think we've come a long way, but I think that there is still some stigma wrapped around it, in knowing that it's a difficult time. And it's hard to come, as parents, it's really hard to come to terms of knowing that our student or child is struggling. And that reality is hard to go through. Yeah.
One of the things that I have been hearing lately is that peers may cause difficulty, the pressure, peer pressure, but there's also kind of a help that teens can provide, people who are really well positioned, these teens, to help those who are their age or even younger. Are you finding that?
Yeah, in fact, we were just talking about that today at school. So, our youth are eyes and ears on the ground. As adults, we get to see little snippets and hear bits and pieces, but they get to see the full picture and know really what's going on with each other. And a lot of times during this age group, they reach out to peers prior to reaching out to any kind of trusted adult. And so having organizations like Youth Lines come into the classrooms and just have that offering of knowing that there's somebody else out there in their age group that's gone through these kinds of difficulties that's also there to kind of hold their hand and guide them to the next step is lovely.
I'm getting the idea that QPR, like CPR, is something you could actually easily learn, so that instead of feeling helpless, you actually have some tools to help someone.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's really all it is about. Some of us go get CPR certified to be ready to help anybody in that moment of crisis. And these moments of crisis are important, especially amongst our teens. Suicide is the second leading cause of death.
Yes.
And so we want more people to be prepared for that.
Give me an example of the kind of situation where this kind of training would really come in handy for somebody in the community.
Sure. I think about just even a conversation I had with a colleague who works up at the high school that we did the QPR training, and she's like, thank you so much for giving us some of these phrases to use or some of the questions to use or reflective language, because in that moment it's really about being present. It's really about having that relationship and providing a moment of hope.
You can ask questions, yes. You can persuade someone to stay alive long enough to get the help they need, but when it comes down to referral, that's where things might get a little tricky.
I think the referral process is, as tricky as it sounds, is actually simple inside of the schools. It gets a little trickier as we move out into the community just because of saturation. We don't have all the resources available to us, and that's on a state level. And so just knowing, but inside of the schools, that they do refer to school counselors as soon as possible, and that from there, we usually do what's called a level 1 suicide risk assessment for students that we have concerns about. And that if it moves to a higher level, that's when we reach out to our community partners and get a secondary level of help.
Since kids are more likely to talk to other kids before they talk to anybody, that almost seems like the target population to really equip with this skill.
Absolutely. Yeah. So with Youth Lines coming into the classrooms, that's a starting point for conversations to be had about suicide. And then school counselors were going in and doing secondary prevention lessons with suicide prevention and being really straightforward and transparent. These are some of the signs and symptoms that we're looking for. These are some of the things that your friends might be saying. These are the times that we want you to report back to a trusted adult as soon as possible. And I think at Salem-Keizer we've done an amazing job. We're training all of our staff at the secondary level, transportation, food services, and with the end goal being by 2021 that all staff members in Salem-Keizer will be trained in QPR training.
Do you ever see the issue of teen suicide kind of abating because enough resources have been put into it, enough people have been trained to kind of bring down the incidence? That's a great to be hoped for, but do you see that as really potentially happening if we find the right way to approach it?
That's a great question. I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful because I believe in the innate strength of every single human being. And sometimes it's just about getting that next touchstone ahead of them in order to continue their journey. And so if we're tapping into that and tapping into their strengths and knowing that they can get through it and helping them through it, that's where my hope lies.
Well, if people want to know more about these training sessions that you're doing with Salem Health, where would they go for more information?
You can just go to salemkeizer.org.
Salem-Keizer.org.
And registration is available right there for them.
Well, thank you for joining us today on InSight. I'm Wendy Brokaw. Our guest today is Kelly Ward with the Salem-Keizer Public School District talking about free teen suicide prevention.